I have so much to talk about.
Where to start?
I just want to start with this idea that something that personally I'm very inspired by, and that is that, look, you start your career at HP, then you go do your own thing, and then you help create, Yahoo's mail platform. You're the chief product officer there. You're, by all estimations, a huge success. Then you create this company that gets bought by Apple, very famous Lala media company. Then you become the founder of Imagine K-12, and then you and now Y Combinator, where arguably you could say dwarfs maybe everything you did before or not. I mean, I think we see a lot of people who they do something great and then they like go to the beach and they just kind of disappear. And I just wanted to ask you why you have continued to keep doing these kinds of things.
You're not suggesting that I should have disappeared.
No,
is there a message
it's going
here?
well. This was a good call on your part. But it's like Act 2 and Act 3 and Act 4 have each subsequently gotten better than the previous act. And I just, I'd like to understand what has driven you to do that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. There's a lot of knowledge out there about what it takes to live a long and happy life. And, there's blue zones. And if you've done any reading on that, there's a whole bunch of places where people live a long, long time with a great health span. And there's a few components of that really struck me and are really critical. Some are not so relevant to this conversation, like, don't eat too much fish or meat. But one of the things that is very consistent, again, across people who live a long, healthy life is that they have a sense of purpose, that what they do matters to them. And I've really taken that to heart, and I've always tried to do something that matters to me. When I left Yahoo, actually, I didn't intend to go into a music startup. What I really meant to do was to make a change in education, because clearly the connected world, all information, all knowledge available all the time, ought to have something to do with education, even though it really didn't at the time. I said, that's weird. So maybe we should do something. Maybe we can do something transformative. It seemed like it was a little too early in 2006. So I went off and did different things, and came back to that and really wanted to, it really mattered to me to make a difference there. And I think Imagine K-12, that's a whole other story, had a positive impact. But here, this platform at YC is extraordinary. And I've come to think about it in an evolved sense over time, since I started working with PG and company back early. I mean, I started hanging out here in 2007, 2008, before I ever joined. And I've come to realize the transformative nature of entrepreneurship, innovation, creating opportunity broadly is important, matters, changes people's lives, transforms communities and outcomes and standards of living in a really positive way. And I understand there's a downside to technology, and we're definitely focused on technology. There's downside to everything. Everything is a double-edged sword, but the positive, I firmly believe, is and will always outweigh the negatives. And so this, for me, it's a mission, it's a purpose in life to make a difference.
Thank you for sharing that. I have one follow-up, and then we'll get to some other things. I think when you start as an entrepreneur, I'm in year 11, and I worked at EA, and then I left and started just sort of failing spectacularly after that. And I think before you become an entrepreneur, maybe in the midst of the beginning of it, you sort of think, wow, like, I'm just gonna, like, if I just sell my company, if I like build a company and I sell it, like, I'm just gonna be so happy, and like life's gonna get so good and it's just gonna be taken care of. And I would just love, I was in a session earlier where just 3 or 4 people, and somebody made a comment sort of about this, that sort of got me thinking about this today, because it was like, hey, they were saying like, hey, I'm selling my company. I'm trying to like do this, and I just wondered if you could share somebody that sold companies, both your own and companies you've worked with, and seen a lot of this, like, you know, this idea that this sense of purpose, you know, does it get stronger after you sell your company and you take care of your family financially? What does that feel like? And then how has that, because I think that's really seems to be driving this sort of, you just keep pushing yourself decade after decade.
One of the beauties and tragedies of the human condition is that we don't tend to get satisfied with outcomes very often. So you never really get there. You never sort of get to a place, you know, if I can just raise my Series A, everything will be fine. No, it won't. You know, I mean, the sort of Damocles, the startup sort of Damocles hanging over your head will end, and sudden death will not be around every corner. That will make it easier. And if I just raise my Series B, then we'll have $100 million in the bank and everything. No, because, you know, your key technologists will quit, and like it'll be hard all the time. It doesn't get easier, and you'll never be satisfied. You go IPO. I can't say go IPO. Kellen Levy, the inventor of the safe at YC, always says it's a noun. Okay, so when you have an initial public offering, when you go public, it won't be enough. It won't change it. The life is about the journey, and it's never about a point you get to. And it's super important to realize that as a startup founder. And the best startup founders think of it that way. They are mission driven. They don't think all I want to do is get to an exit. And often they'll have great exits, and that'll be the story. But the truly epic stories are the ones like Mark Zuckerberg who turned down
$2 billion or $1 billion.
There's an inside scoop to that. It wasn't quite $1 billion, and that was part of the problem.
But you were there. You were maybe there. You were at Yahoo during that time, right? Yeah.
So the real story was it was right after I left. But but anyway, he turned down lots and lots of money because he believed in what he was doing. He never wanted to be bought even for $1 billion, whatever it was. And and that's always true. Jerry and David at Yahoo were offered a couple $1 million when they were graduate students. They said no. And if anyone out there has been a graduate student, someone offers you $2 million because you're playing around with some silly thing called Yahoo, you might want to think about taking it, right?
Right.
$2 million, like that's real money, but they didn't, and because they had a broader, longer term idea.
Okay, one more thought here, and then we'll move on. But you spurred another thought, and that is that a couple of summers ago, I was happened to be on this bus, and Justin Kahn was there, and we were talking about this this idea of sort of like finding purpose, and sort of finding meaning in what you're doing, no matter what it is or how big or small it is. And he made a comment to me, and he said, "Look, I sold my company for $1 billion." He said, my friend of mine's company is worth $30 billion. He's like, is that person 30 times better than me? Is that person 30 times more successful than me? Is that person's company is now worth like $100 billion. So and what he explained to me, and I'd love to get your perspective, is that, again, and you say, "Oh, Justin Kahn, so sorry for you. You sold your company for $1 billion." But it's really not about that. It could be anything. And it's just a matter of it's sort of like, what is your purpose of doing these things? And the purpose is to really discover meaning in life, and to help other people, and to bring value to the world. And these other things kind of are a byproduct of that. But like, if you don't have meaning and purpose, doesn't matter if you sell for $1 billion or $2 billion, you'll think Zuckerberg is 100 times or the person you'll ever be, which he's not. Do you see founders going through this, or how do you see people sort of coming to terms with who they are and what they're building, and being happy with that?
There are the reasons why it is difficult to be a founder are legion. And no small amount of that is the set of things that creep into your brain while you're trying to do really the hardest thing you can do in your professional life. And a lot of those are relativistic things like, oh, look at how successful X or Y or Z is compared to how I'll ever be. And I just don't think that that sort of thing provides almost any sort of positive feedback for you. It has to be about what you're trying to do and you're trying to achieve. And comparing yourself to the person next door, there is always someone who's more successful, who has more money, who has done more than you. That doesn't mean they're a better person or a happier person than you. And it, in some sense, it doesn't necessarily even mean they're more successful than you. It depends on how you want to measure that. And that is very personal too. What your success is. The most successful thing you might do is raise two amazing children, and they might be having trouble with their children. Who knows? You don't even know, you don't know that person. You can't get inside their head, and you can't get inside what makes sense. All you can do is control what you can control. So do that. And that's a major important thing that I would always tell a founder is stay happy, stay sane, and work your butt off. And those things all go together, because you can't really do the last one without the first one and the first ones. And so focus on that, and focus on yourself, and focus on the value you're building in your community. And that's more important than any of that other crap.
Thank you for sharing that. Well said. How has COVID impacted or changed Y Combinator and what you all are doing?
Well, like the entire world, it's affected everything we are and everything we do. It had to. In March, there was, I had a pretty quick epiphany that we needed immediately to make our batch, which was in session remote only. And so we canceled all batch events. And then we immediately said, oh, damn, we have this, demo day event, which is really 3 days. There's an alumni demo day and then 2 actual demo days. And it's, each one is like 1,000 people in an auditorium. That doesn't seem likely right now. So we had to immediately say, nope, it's all virtual. Sorry. And we pulled it in a week because I thought that things were only going to get worse and worse and worse, which at first it was true. Things got worse and worse and worse. So it was good that we pulled it in. And then we transformed our entire summer batch. Well, I shouldn't skip a step. I also immediately said, okay, everyone go home, because we don't have an office anymore. You can't come in anymore. So we transformed ourselves into a virtual organization. By the way, I reached out to YC companies like GitLab and Zapier, who had been virtual from day one, for advice. We had a big advantage within our own community of being able to
they're amazing.
Who knew how to do it. They're amazing companies who knew how to do it and could give us guidance as we kind of brutally, like many people, like your organization, like organizations around the world, suddenly had to only operate from remote. And then we said, okay, clearly this is going to be durable. Summer 2020 batch, all virtual, all remote. We don't do interviews in Mountain View anymore. We were starting to travel around the world and do interviews in places like India, Tel Aviv, Sao Paulo. Stopped doing that, and turned our entire system into a remote only. Wrote a ton of software to manage interviews. Wrote a ton of software to recreate our demo day site and our demo day process, and rethought essentially everything about YC from the ground up. A lot of credit goes to so many people like Michael Seibel and his team, Dalton Caldwell and Stephanie Simons and our admissions team. So many people reinvented how YC works. Our entire software team led by Jared is emblematic of the set of things that we had to do to recreate, to reinvent YC.
What's your perspective on how many? And so, Social Network movie came out in like 2011, I want to say, maybe 2010. And I remember thinking at the time, watching like peak startups, like this is it. We jumped the shark tonight. Like, and then it just continued and continued. And then it's like, oh, it can't get bigger than this. And it just like keeps going. And now with Zoom and everything, making investments and so much money from people like wanting to be part of DoorDash at the earliest level and be part of Airbnb success at the earliest level has like, it's like everybody's an investor. I got 6 cousins that are investors now in startups. So like, what is YC's perspective on what's happening with that market and this sort of what feels like this just explosion of money and capital into startups? And all your batches have gotten much bigger too. So not necessarily this year versus other years, but it just keeps progressively getting bigger. What is this a good thing? Is this concerning? Is this, what do you all think about that?
I think it's mostly a really good thing. It adds challenges up and down the ecosystem, right? But more capital to drive more innovation, more startups is great. I don't know. I mean, it's strange, right? The worry back in March of 2020 was, wow, venture capital might just dry up. This is this, black swan event. Damn, what's going to happen? And will investors even invest in companies over Zoom? That seems strange. By the way, we were in the middle of our own fundraise, so we got to test that ourselves at YC. And it turns out investors are perfectly happy to invest over Zoom. And
at least with YC.
No, with YC, but not at least with YC, with everybody, because venture capital, as you pointed out, all this money flowing in, it's all getting deployed over Zoom, right?
Yeah.
So there's billions and billions of dollars being spent by investors on, invested in by investors in companies over Zoom. It turns out that, I guess Zoom is a good enough way to determine whether you're going to write a check for $100,000 or $5 million. And
yeah.
And at the same time, one of the effects of COVID was to accelerate a move to digital, move to online, move to technology that was happening anyway, which created in many investors' minds, and I think in reality, enormous opportunity. So now is the time to invest. And this brought a lot of money into the market. Now, is that a secular thing, or is there a shorter term, glut of money? I don't know. Hard to say. There's certainly a secular change in terms of how quickly the acceleration to digital is happening, and so that opportunity isn't going away. And whether Amazon's going to be a $4 trillion company in a few years or not, and whether there'll be brand new Amazons created, I think we would probably lean towards something like that is going to happen. Whether Amazon is really 4 trillion or what the new gigantic companies are, but they will be there for sure.
We had Vlad from Webflow, who I spoke with this morning to start the day, and one of the things he's a really amazing guy. One of the things that struck me about his story was he's like, look, going into demo day with YC, which has this sort of mythical reverence about it by some. He was like, look, like all the good companies had raised. And we were kind of like waiting and thought this thing was going to come, and then nothing really came. And we had raised like $300,000, and then eventually he said that PG had told them to just close it up. You have 300,000, run that for a year, 3 founders, and then when they told people that, then they were able to, I think, get another $1 million or so, with people having the fear of them not raising or getting to raise from them. But the thing I want to ask you about is just, you have a company like that, which is now valued over $2 billion a few years later. And they go through that process and they hit that event, and still people don't totally see it. And I just wonder, like, from your perspective, I mean, that it seems like a really fine line between like not sure if it's going to work and like, oh my gosh, this is like huge and going big. And as a founder, like, how do I get things over that to that place, or how do I move things to that line, or even
I wouldn't quite define it exactly that way. It's not a fine line between I don't know, but this one's for sure going to be huge.
Yeah,
it's the line is at the stage that YC invests at in a demo day is really, I don't know a little bit less, so I'm going to invest a lot. I mean, no one wanted to invest in Airbnb. You could have bought 10% of Airbnb for like a few $100,000 back in the day, and that would have been a good investment. Mark those words, right? So it's just, here's just something I like to tell entrepreneurs is when you go and pitch an investor and they say no, never, ever, ever take it personally. Don't be angry. They're almost certainly right. It's a super hard thing to determine who, especially in the earliest stages, when all of your ideas are just, predictions about a future that is, always hard to predict. It's super hard. And it's super hard at demo day. And there's so many stories like Vlad's of like, Derek's company, they're the hot ones. And Derek's company, kind of goes like that. And then there's a sleeper company that no one knew about that just takes off and does incredibly well. It's just complicated to know. There were plenty of times when everyone wrote DoorDash off when it was, really a tough call, and it wasn't obvious that they were going to be the, like $70 billion company they are today on the public markets. Go figure, right? Yeah. It is hard. Now, you asked, if I might continue, you asked but how do you move from one to the other? Well, tell a better story. That's all investors are buying into. They're buying into your story. Now, I don't just mean by words, of course, when you tell a better story. You tell it, a better story has more evidence that the story might just come true that you're telling. You have more users, more growth, more revenue, more cool technology that you've built, a better product. Those are the sorts of things that end up being persuasive evidence that, yeah, maybe you just might be one of those companies on that road to epic success.
You said never to take it personally, but I take all of them personally, 100%.
Yeah, it's hard. Easier said than done when someone says no to you, right? But like the mark of a startup founder is no matter how many times you get punched in the face and knocked down, you just get yourself back up, you dust yourself off, and off you go to the next meeting, the next chance to persuade someone that your extraordinary vision of what the future is with your company being an epic company is the true one, is the right one, is what will really transpire.
Yeah. And one of the things too that at least that I found is that when somebody says no, that really could be the beginning of them actually saying yes, because they put you in the back of their brain, and they, and like every time you have an announcement, every time something happens, like they think about the decision they made. And a lot of times investors, when they say no, like that's like some of them, you can never get them back, but some of them, like it can also actually be like the thing that gets them for the next round or for something in 2 years from now. I had an angel investor recently who passed on the angel round of our company, and 3 years later send me an email like, hey, can I come in? Which would have been exponentially more expensive than it had been, 3 years before. And I did take it personally when he said no, but also like that felt really good. And well, how cool, what a great story that is, right? Like this person passed then and now they're still coming back all these years later. And you just don't, I think that's what you're saying. Like you don't know how like things are going to end up shaping out and how it's going to evolve over time.
No, I think that's well said. I think it's an important lesson, which is the only reason an investor is ever going to say no forever is because they don't trust you. They lose confidence in you as a person, as a human being for whom they would write a check for. So that's something you should never do. It's why being honest is super important. But secondly, your point is well taken. Investors are never really saying no. They're saying not now. I don't believe yet. And if you come back,
I don't believe yet. That's a great way to look at it. I don't believe yet.
Yeah. but you can make them believe. At some point, if you hit them over the head hard enough, they'll be like, okay, I believe now. It might be when you have $50 million in revenue and they shove you over to their growth fund, but and you know, too bad, because they could have gotten the same stake for a quarter, a tenth of the price. But that doesn't mean they don't want to grab on. And by the way, you know, buying Facebook at $1 billion would have been a good investment.
Amazing investment. Yeah. And they may come back and like just do the round immediately because they already spent all this time, or they spent like they know you. And so like that actually can pay off a lot down the road and like save you exponential amounts of time and energy. As long as I love what you say, like as long as you don't lose their trust.
It's a good lesson for raising money and in life in general, is just don't burn bridges. So, you know, if someone turns you down, write a nice email. Not like, you idiot, I'm going to be the biggest company ever. Like, no, don't write that. Just write that, you know, thanks for your consideration, and who knows. And again, I think that's extensible to any interaction you have with people in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope you don't.
Most companies now, in the end, apply to YC more than once before they get in. And, you know, if you come into an interview at YC and we reject you, for whatever reason we reject you, sometimes it's because we just don't believe yet, and you write us some nasty email, your probability of getting in later isn't great. But if you're smart about it and reasonable about it and say, you know, great opportunity, thank you, the next batch when you apply, you know, maybe you'll just get in.
What percent of YC rejections end in a really nasty reply, somebody sort of not having that perspective?
Tiny.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
I mean, most, hopefully we've done a good job by the time. So we do personal rejection letters with an explanation only for the folks we interview, because we get over 15,000 applications. We can't do a personal letter to every one of those. So hopefully we've done a good job filtering by the time they get to interviews, so that we have a better chance of that not happening.
I think that's actually one of the best parts of YC is that, you know, most people, again, to your point of what they're saying is, I don't believe yet. And so they don't want to ruin that chance. So they won't actually give you real reasons. But I think YC's it would be easy to just do the standard thing and just say, sorry, not right now. But actually, you know, it's been good about like, here are some of the concrete reasons. Like, of course we may be wrong, but like, hopefully this informs you so that you can, you know, you have something to like work towards if it's helpful. And those things I think are helpful for people.
To be really honest, one of the cool things about doing a virtual batch is it's allowed us to be somewhat more expansive in how we think about the companies that we can accept, because a lot of times there's companies on the borderline that you'd really like to accept, but you know, you're just not over the line. It's just difficult. And like I said, there's this fine line between I'm just not sure and maybe. And you can, you know, if you turn your head a little bit, you can always think maybe. And that's one of the things I learned from Paul Graham, is the founder of YC, that is a hugely important lesson for both investors and founders, is this innate sense of optimism, of belief. We believe in our companies, the companies we fund, so hard with such fervor that it's kind of infectious. And you can't help as a founder to believe more after going through YC. You believe more. You've made more progress. You have a better chance of success, if only because you believe more.
Where does PG rank in the technology sort of, I don't know, GOAT list? Like, I mean, his impact on startups over the last 15 years has been arguably greater cumulatively than any single one person. I know he's like, your whole team is unbelievable and you got dozens of people working on it, but where does, from all these people you've met and interacted with, where does he kind of stack up, and what do you think people will say about him once we're further past this era that we're in?
Yeah, I think he's been really important. One way to look at YC is that it was built around his writing, his essays. In fact, we actually were founded because he gave a talk called "How to Start a Startup" to the Harvard Compute Society, the undergraduate computer science forum, in 2005. He turned that talk into an essay. You can still find it online, and that inspired him and his girlfriend at the time, wife now, Jessica Livingston, to start YC. And so much of how people think about startups sort of emanated from his essays and his thinking deeply and expressing, all importantly, so clearly the ideas behind how to start a startup, what makes a startup successful, how should you think about the set of things you need to do to build a successful startup. I can't do any rankings. I don't know. I didn't even know there was a ranking thing.
There's not.
Is there a scoreboard?
No, there's not. I listen to the LeBron James, Michael Jordan debate too much, I think.
Well, I'm a tennis player, so I usually think about, like, Nadal versus Djokovic versus Federer. Although I think I'm going to be unhappy with the long-term result there, but whatever.
You've talked.
ATP points for investors. I like it. Okay, I'm still on the ranking thing.
What was that site, the Unfunded or something like that? That was
right.
Yeah. Well, you all have something like that. I won't ask you about it, but you've got some investor scoring going on.
Of course.
We're gonna go to Q&A from the audience here. So Alex, feel free to jump up and start taking some of those. But you've talked about before about sort of not being too smart. This idea around, I wonder if you could just help us understand that, and maybe that's from the investor perspective, but maybe from the CEO or founding team perspective of sort of not is that not having blind spots, or what does that mean exactly?
I think of that
mostly too smart.
I think of that mostly from the investor's perspective. I'll just give a couple of sort of standard examples, but there's many, 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 many more that we have where we have been too smart and regretted it, well, okay. So I'll start with me. My problem is I had a company in the music space, and so I have all sorts of prejudices against music startups, which means when the next huge potential multi-billion-dollar company applies to YC, there's a real big risk that I'm going to be too smart about it. And what I really should do is if it's like, two awesome people like Derek and Alex, who I just know are awesome, I should just assume that they'll be smarter than I am and figure something out. If you want to be too smart, you should never fund a taxi startup, because there's only so many black cars in San Francisco. Like, there's just no way you can do a market, so you'll miss Uber. Or you can say, look, the idea of funding a startup that's going to put airbeds in people's houses to manage overflow from hotels at conferences, not a big idea. Just not, like, there's no way that's going to matter. Well, if you ignore the fact that Brian, Joe, and Nate were extraordinary, were just, tough. They were still doing, they burnt their fingers building boxes for breakfast cereal and sold $40,000. Like, these guys were not going away, and you would have missed Airbnb. There's many, many, many stories, actual stories, where we look back at companies we should have funded, and said we were too smart. We all have our own personal examples of that within YC. I think that, which is why you hear so often from especially early stage investors, but throughout the spectrum from early stage to growth, that you're really investing in the people. And so if you can sense, and that, boy, by the way, that's still hard, but if you can sense a glimpse, a spark of something different and extraordinary and special in someone, invest in them. It'll always be smart. Even if it's not that company, you'll get another chance. Invest in those people. So that's kind of what I mean by being too smart. I do think when you're a startup founder, maybe there's an analogy where your intuition matters a lot, and I don't know that you can be too smart about your intuition, but get data too to support your intuition, and then iterate. If you think you're Steve Jobs and you know exactly what to build for customers, that's great. But we think you should actually talk to your customers and get feedback, because, I always think back to what Drew Houston told me about the first time he put Dropbox in front of customers. It was great product right off because they made it better. They made it work. And he said, I had pages and pages and pages of notes of everything that was awful about our product and everything that was wrong. And then you take that feedback and you get better.
Awesome. Thank you.
Geoff, I got a lot of good questions here from the audience. A bunch of them, given especially that we've got 87 countries represented on the Startup Summit today, are to do with geography. So I'll go with them, and I'm sure you get them a lot. But besides Silicon Valley, what are the markets that you're particularly interested in, and for what reason would be a good place to start, I think?
Gosh, the easy answer to that is all. Another thing that remote has done is made it much easier for international founders to think about YC and the calculus as to how they build their startups and how they grow. We have extraordinary startups right now in South America, for example. Rappi is the most obvious example, which is sort of a combination of Instacart and DoorDash in South America. We have amazing companies in Southeast Asia, super exciting markets. Obviously, I shouldn't leave out China. China's a little bit more complicated to fund, but we do fund a bunch of Chinese startups. But India, extraordinary. We have such cool startups already, and it's cool YC startup community in India. I wish I could tell you that there was a market I wasn't excited about. I will say this. I think that the developing economies, so I mentioned a few. I didn't mention Africa, but Africa, we have incredible startups now in Africa. Those things are the things that in some sense I'm most excited about, because the transformative nature of those startups and those communities is just, it's more impactful, right?
Yeah.
It makes a bigger difference in those economies and those communities and in people's lives there. But there's a transformative nature of technology anyway in every market. In the first world, there's incredible companies in Europe that we're funding, but I do have a special place in my heart for the developing economies, because such startups can make such a difference there and be so impactful.
I love that. And again, this is sort of, I was just trying to merge a few questions there because we've only got a few minutes and there's a lot of interesting ones. This one here is sort of almost kind of coming on from that question. What do you think is the future of startup acceleration? What can existing kind of world infrastructure of startup accelerators do better to give those opportunities, give those startups from developing ecosystems the same chances or better chances comparatively to make it big and have these large valuations and eventually exit with big numbers?
Yeah, well, the future's hard to predict. So I'll say a couple of things about that. We can help more companies. That's why we have Startup School, by the way, where tens of thousands of founders can go through Startup School every year and get immense value. That's why we've built the library of content at startupschool.org, so that everyone can get smarter and better at starting a startup. And that's why we're funding more companies than ever in 2021, because we think giving more companies the opportunity, giving us the opportunity to invest in more companies is positive every way you look at it. I think that the next set of things that has to happen is that investing ecosystems need to be built in these in these countries. And again, there's a virtuous cycle here. The more successful startups that there are, the more angels that are created, the more venture capitalists can raise money, and the more the whole cycle will work and will hopefully create more value.
Well, it's certainly the world we play in as well. Start growing our community. We're trying to make it as globally inclusive as we possibly can. So it's a wonderful space to be in. We've just got a couple minutes left, so I want to kind of try and make the questions diverse. This one I really liked as well, and it goes back to the beginning and the questions that you and Derek were discussing then. How do you see the top YC alumni founders managing their mindset and mental health as they do the growth in the later stages?
I'm trying to think of the founders that I've talked to. I think that I will say this: the ones I've talked to have all learned that it's incredibly important, and they do what's necessary to stay whole and happy and sane. And that might mean disconnecting. I was talking to one extraordinarily successful YC company founder who had just taken a week off to do a meditation retreat, complete stop everything, go and just, think about life and, contemplate the future of everything. I think any founder that gets to that stage has been through years and years of troubles, of difficulty. Always. There's no two ways about it. And so in essence, I think if they've come through that, they've learned what they need to do to stay healthy. Some of it is organizing yourself effectively. Some of it is delegating effectively. And some of it is learning when you need to recharge.
Well, I mean, even Bill Gates had was famous for having those retreats himself, didn't he? Where he went off into the middle of the wilderness in a cabin and read his books for a week with no contact with the outside world. So people have been doing
individual, very personal.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking personally, I have a hard time doing that myself. So maybe I need to take a break here. You're me.
Well, thanks to the person who you can thank the person who posted that question.
Thank you.
I'm conscious that the time has come to the hour. Obviously, once again, as always, we have an innumerable amount of questions we could ask.
Why don't we take one more? Take one more.
Should we take one more? Okay, I love that. Let me just look through them and see what I can find. Okay, this is a good one, and again, it could be a bit more controversial, but not controversial, but difficult to answer. Who is one YC company or founder that you've been the most impressed with, and why?
So I apologize, but I won't name names because that seems unfair.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I will say this: there's no end to the admiration that I have for founders who have made it through and made it through successfully. There's a couple of folks that I think about, a couple of companies that I think about where there's one company I'm thinking about. There's a couple of founders who now have a multi-billion-dollar company where they had great technology, great technologists, great product people, and they did not have product market fit for years and years, and they kept at it. They just kept at it. They kept at it, and the world came to them finally. And they knew and believed and had a vision that they stuck to over, close to a decade now. Super impressive. And I just that kind of guts and belief is hard to come by. And the second thing is there's a few founders at YC who are solo founders who have managed to build multi-billion-dollar companies that I just have no end of admiration for. It is hard enough to do a startup when you have a team to begin with. Doing it by yourself is a sign of mental strength and fortitude that I personally know I don't have. I tried it myself and I couldn't do it. And the last thing to say, there's a few cases where There's been real trauma within a founding team. Sometimes founders getting sick and otherwise, and the founders have come through that. And again, that kind of handling that humanely and decently, and yet still building your company, I love. And I apologize for not naming names, but those are true stories of YC companies that are going to be fantastically successful.
Well, it's an amazing place to finish, and it sort of touches on what Derek was saying about Vlad at Webflow. I mean, he went through he's been through all sorts of things. I think he was talking about how he's launched Webflow 3 times, and they've been through all these ups and downs. And
great story.
It just comes back to what you said at the beginning of having to love the journey. Like, you literally have to love what you're doing and the process. The outcome is a byproduct, and you have to love the process to be able to go through that much for 10 years. And
I will say this for everyone listening: you won't always love it. Sometimes it'll suck. Sure. Sometimes it'll be painful. It'll hurt. But you have to be a little meta about it, because you'll know, looking back at some of the hardest times, you look back and it's like, that's where I really learned, and that's where I grew. And so it's really the process writ large.
Yeah. Well, Geoff, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been a really valuable 45, 50 minutes for everyone, I'm sure, and hopefully for you as well. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'd love to have you. We always love having you at Startup Grind. So have a great rest of your day, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Derek. Hopefully you're still listening. I appreciate everyone's time. Bye.